Good afternoon, goeiemiddag. Dames en heren, dit is die 12de jaar dat ons nasie in gesprek aanbied. En dit het een van die grootste media en content creators geword binne ons spectrum. Theo, wat van jaar 2 af is met ons. En dit het Theo, wat in die beleggingswêreld was, eintlik 'n huishoudelike naam gemaak in landbou. Almal van julle wat in die waardeketting betrokke is, ek dink is waarskynlik een van ons grootste ambassadeurs geraak in landbou en die waardekettings. Dankie vir die span. Ek sien uit, dis 'n geweldige interessante onderwerp. Ek is bly jou ouers is vandag hier so. Ek kan sien genetika werk. So, en natuurlik vir ons borge. Hier's 'n klomp van Netbank in. Julle is van die begin af is julle saam met ons. Ons is baie trots om julle ook as ons borge te hê. Geniet vandag se sessie, Theo. Sterkte.
Dankie, Fransjo.
There is no doubt that climate change has a significant impact on agriculture, and the effects are felt across the globe. Factors such as changing temperatures, rising and falling precipitation levels, an increase in pests and soil degradation can lead to reduced yields and productivity, all threatening food security and the livelihood of communities reliant on agriculture.
Since time immemorial, plant breeders and the seed business have always looked at the environment and bred varieties suitable to it. Climate change that we are facing today is no different a challenge than what they have faced 100, 1,000 years ago. Today we are perhaps dealing with more pressure on the environment, bulging populations, diverse diets, and climate change just makes it harder for us. We have the technology available today to meet those challenges. We have plant breeding innovation, molecular breeding, we have access to genetics from all over the world that could help us deal with pests, drought, too much rain, too much heat, too cold weather. We just need an enabling environment to do that, and that environment is the policy environment.
The situation is twofold. Climate change impacts agriculture, but agriculture also impacts climate change. Greenhouse gas emissions, deforestation, significant water usage, and the disturbance of biodiversity are some of the concerns often raised.
Climate change has a severe impact on agriculture as a whole. Looking at the whole farming life cycle, from preparation, planting, and looking after your crop to harvesting, data plays a very important role. So a holistic approach from industry to unlock the value and looking at all these data layers on top of each other to assist our farmers in actionable insights is extremely important, and the sharing of data through this process. When we focus a little bit on harvesting, the productivity is extremely important. The window that is available to take your crop off the field is extremely small. So having the capacity, but also the automation in place to make sure that your grain sample is clean and you have minimized losses.
As far as climate change is concerned, at the moment the focus is very much on renewable energy for South Africa, but there are various regulatory instruments which thus far agriculture has been exempted from, specifically sectoral emission targets and direct carbon tax liability. But these are bound to come. One's already seeing from the finance side, there's a big push to finance sustainably. From the markets as well, especially the EU market where many of our products are exported to, there's a very big push to trace your sustainability and your carbon footprint. So as AGBIS, one of the initiatives we've been mulling to launch soon is the Sustainability Index. In other words, to measure as a sector as a whole, to see changes and progression over time, what amount is invested per year into sustainability initiatives. And this includes sustainable energy, sustainable finance, as well as water use efficiency, climate change, etc. So an overall holistic picture of where the sector stands.
So, what can be done to minimize the negative impact of climate change? The implementation of new farming practices is a costly process. As we straddle the fine line between profitability and stewardship, we must ask ourselves, when does it make sense to change?
Welcome to this Nation and Conversation discussion. Francois, thank you very much. This is the 12th year that we have these discussions, and we will have various topics for the rest of the week, but welcome today. We're going to talk for about 40 odd minutes, and then I'm going to allow a few questions. Hopefully this will be an interactive discussion. I think it's clearly a topic that is important, and it's becoming more and more important as the population on the planet grows, as food security becomes more important, and obviously the whole question of climate change, of global warming becomes more paramount. This discussion will remain top of the agenda. But before I start, I would like to thank Derek Matthews. Derek is the chairperson of Grain SA for another NAMPU. Yeah. I think in the years where we had COVID, we actually realized the importance of these events. And Derek, all the best. I again hope it's a successful NAMPU. As chairperson of Grain SA, thank you very much. It is something, as Francois always said, that I think every South African, at least once in their lifetime, need to attend NAMPU. Thank you very much. But on a second point, Grain SA also announced a change in their logo. Derek, can you perhaps just show that to the camera? Yeah, sure. That's the new logo on Derek's jacket. There's also one there up there. It's streamlined, and I think it is showing that Grain SA is also moving with the times. We need to address the younger generation, and we need to stay current. So, Derek, thank you very much, and well done.
Thank you too. I think, just to, we call it a brand refresh. We found it strategically important to make sure that we remain relevant. And if you listen to the presentation on our launch of the new brand, it's about the organization remaining relevant, remaining on the cutting edge.
All the best. I think if we look at NAMPO, certainly it is relevant.
Yeah,
so,
thank you.
Guys, we've got a great panel today, but I am going to start with Janse Rabie. Now, Janse is here as part of the Presidential Climate Commission. So, Janse, I'm going to start with you from a government point of view. As part of the President's Commission, what is the government's view on climate change and what we're talking about today?
It's an interesting question. I think the very fact that the President convened a Presidential Climate Commission, and if you look at the representation of the participants, and even agriculture is included in the list of commissioners on the commissioner person, sees that government is taking it seriously. And government really doesn't have much of a choice, because there are geopolitics at play here, which means that it's vitally important for South Africa and particularly our vast economy to take note of what the developments are. What's interesting is that a person's moving a little bit away from the politics to more the science. And I think there's a broader acceptance of the fact that climate change is a reality, globally as well as in South Africa. And coincidentally, we're also finding ourselves at a time when climate change is coming up as a topic, a very topical agenda item in all discussions, at a same time where there's this juncture of Eskom and an electricity collapse in South Africa, which brings the topic very close now to everyone's hearts. Now, I think the one thing that government probably needs to focus upon, it's been a very energy-driven climate commission, and the work of the climate commission has been very energy specific. But that connection between water, food, and energy is something that needs to be emphasized in this Presidential Climate Commission. But to answer your question directly, government does take note of it. It's taking it seriously, and it's trying to take measures or steps to address the issue as such.
Gerard van der Berg is from BFAB, senior analyst. Gerard, if you link that towards agriculture, just give us, I know you guys have done extensive research on not only on climate change, but also on the factors around that, both the causes as well as the impact, your view.
Yeah, so as Janse mentioned, it's a vast topic. So when we tie it back to the industry and to agriculture in South Africa, in the end, it comes back to a market, right? So we have farmers sitting here, and the large part of our audience, in the primary production sector. In the end, if there's no market, then you don't have a means of existence. And if we link that back to the client, a big portion of our gross production value in agriculture comes from exports, if we think about the fruit industry. So in essence, there's a big connection between how you mitigate and adapt and prove that you are trying to mitigate as an industry, linking that back to your market. In other words, the EU, big topics like ESG and your just energy transition. So commitments made by government, a COP26 as an example, if you're part of that party, then you need to adhere to the rules. And making commitments over there means implicitly that your industry will have to follow suit. I think the nice bit is, or the way we can complement agriculture in general, is they've already been in the adaptation and mitigation plans. Farmers have been mitigating climate risks for the past 150 years. I think now only it's the question is how do you measure that? And that's where industry and collaboration and call it vormigheid within the industry is actually required. Where the industry understands that this is the way we measure, this is the tools we use to measure it, and that's where the science comes in, which is a big debate and topic on its own, which unfortunately, I mentioned it earlier again, it's still young. So research on carbon sequestration, research on how severe these events have been over the past 150, but then you need to go back 400, 500, and 1,000 years. And then you go to how do we analyze that and what measurements are used to analyze it, and it becomes really complex. So I think in the end, the positive side from our perspective is the market will always drive that incentive. And in the end, if there's a positive pull factor, the industry will adapt, and they've been adapting. So we actually see it as a positive, not as this severe negative.
And just to clarify, so it's almost on both sides. On the one end, there's rules and regulations. On the other end, there's a consumer.
Correct.
And these two demand certain actions around, and you noted ESG, but there's broader than that. If I come to you specifically, more from an international perspective, now, Jacques van Rensburg is with the WWF specifically around these elements that we're talking about now. If you talk about your view on climate change, specifically around agriculture, just give us some background.
Right, so my background is as an ecologist. So I've been working with environment and restoration for over a decade now. And since I've been with WWF, we've been focusing on the sustainable food systems, and there's a number of projects that we're involved with. And over this time, I've become increasingly more interested in how farmers approach farming. Now, I'm very aware that there's many different soil types, and microclimates, and different commodities, and they all require different resources from the environment. So one thing that is abundantly clear is that agriculture is reliant on ecosystem services, so we need a functional ecosystem to provide those services to farms. Historically, agriculture, unfortunately, with the Green Revolution, has contributed to a significant loss in biodiversity globally, and has also contributed to the greenhouse gas emissions. But the projects that we work on, specifically in the Cape Winelands currently, and the Eastern Cape, and some of my colleagues, are trying to see how we can incorporate, because it is the interlink between conserving biodiversity, unlocking new ecosystems, and protecting the remaining natural habitats in order for us to farm sustainably in South Africa. And then when it comes to farming practices, the Green Revolution, if you want to call it that, with the advent of large-scale agriculture, there has to be a just transition to create a more resilient agricultural industry within South Africa, so that if there is a El Niño effect or whatever, we go through a drought spurt, that the farmers are ready for something like that. So there's a number of farms that we work with that integrate various processes that are creating healthier soils, abundant soils that will last, and through that process they are sequestering carbon into the soils and make the soil more resilient when it comes to droughts and so on. So the question around mitigation, I feel that is an integrated approach where we need to focus. Landowners are all custodians of their land, So at the same time, they have to take some responsibility when it comes to the clean water that they produce or comes out of the aquifers or the catchment area. And it's not just a farm level, it's a landscape level. So us as a community and as an organization, as WWF, we try and promote that landscape level approach where we go with conservation, we work with conservation organizations, landowners, government, the supply chain, which is an integral part of the process as well.
I just want to come back to a point that agriculture, Jacques, there's a responsibility on agriculture, but then I'm going to circle back to it later in the conversation. But there's also elements where agriculture is actually responsible for some of these climate change. Just touch on that briefly.
Yeah, so intensive farming requires a lot of inputs. Those inputs generally with agrochemicals and synthetic fertilizers and all those type of things generally have a negative effect on biodiversity and the environment. Fertilizers leach into your aquifers, fertilizers leach into your wetland systems and create problems from a biodiversity perspective and ecosystem function perspective. And then obviously agrochemicals, you get weed resistant or weeds that are resistant to herbicides nowadays. And pesticides has got a massive impact on pollinators and natural predators that you can find within integrated systems. There's been a shift that I've seen in the farms that we work with that are now integrating natural corridors between big portions of land that is being protected, and it provides an avenue for wildlife to travel through and provide a little habitat or niche for pollinators and insects. And that there's a lot of research still needs to go into all this, but
I just wanted to get that there's both sides to that coin. Derek, bar for the fact that you are the chairperson of Grain SA, you also a farmer, Silverton Boerdery.
Yeah.
And you're specifically here as a farmer, as somebody that is part of producing food on a sustainable, cost-effective, healthy way for South African consumers. Your view on climate change and agriculture.
So Theo, thanks for the disclaimer up front. I'm not a scientist, so when I express my views about climate change, it comes from the experience that I've had. I'm busy harvesting right now my 40th crop. And
you're here as a farmer.
My reference point is my experience. Now it's ludicrous to try and think that farmers don't understand climate change or whatever, because every farmer that, particularly in the grain industry, if he doesn't understand what nature is, what he's dealing with in the climate, in nature, and if he's not adaptable, then he won't be farming next year. It is actually quite as simple as that. And if he's not looking after, if he doesn't understand what good soil health means, then he doesn't understand sustainability. So that's my reference point. Then, out of that comes, I have a lot of questions. There's this huge debate or this huge narrative now, climate change. So has the climate never been changing? The climate is constantly changing. It's not something new. We're talking about it as if it's something new and if it's this massive threat. And I participated in a panel a month ago in Stellenbosch at a research symposium on the same topic. And I was sitting listening to one of the scientists presenting all the data. And sitting there, excuse the expression, but I was getting the fear of God spoken into me. And then at the end of the day, she puts up the rainfall statistics. And actually, we're getting wetter. Where I'm farming, the prediction is that we're getting wetter. So where I farm, with grain, give me temperature, give me water, and I'll produce a fantastic crop. So I shouldn't be getting scared about it. I should be getting excited about it. So there's this. I have a dilemma with the way the narrative goes, because it fuels activism, and it fuels where farmers. It's real to us. It's our reality every day that we're on the farm, and the best thing that we can do is ensure resilience, ensure understanding, ensure adaptability, so that farmers have the skills and the knowledge to adapt as quickly as possible to remain sustainable.
Otherwise, they're not going to survive.
Of course.
So farmers and Dani Slabbert is a regenerative farmer from Van Rooyen's woning in Reitz. Dani, welcome.
Yeah, thank you.
Dani, from your point of view, your farming practices and farming with nature, just give us some background.
Yeah, thank you too. I can just say my experience started when I started observing what's going on with our soils. Exactly. So if you can see the decline in your own time, in your generation, then the red lights must go on. So we had a lot of trouble with erosion, with wind and water erosion. We had a lot of trouble with losing biodiversity. We lost almost all life on our farms. If we can imagine how it should have been, or must have been 100 or 200 years back. And that's only the stuff we can see. So what happened, in my inspiration was out of observation, and I just had this thought, this can't be sustainable. This can't go forever. It can probably go on for another 100 or 200 years, I don't know. But it's definitely not sustainable forever. And we are on this planet for such a short time, and I started observing, for example, differences in the veld from when I was a kid until now. And that just inspired me to make a difference. So what I'm trying to do is to try and farm more nature's way, as we can call it. So I'm trying to do less harm, because we've done a lot of harmful stuff. We can be, and I was included in that. I'm still doing harmful stuff. It's not that easy. But we're trying to do. We're not trying. We're doing no tillage. That's got a huge factor, but that's only one of the steps you can do. So we're trying to really make a difference on our soil, soil biodiversity, soil life, soil health, soil what you want to call it, and that makes a huge difference in climate. I'm talking about the influence of climate on our farm. So if it's climate change or not, we will always have droughts. We will always have hot summers. We will always have runoff, and we will always have wind. But we must, as farmers, we've got this great responsibility. As the previous guy said, we are custodians. We've got this responsibility. And if we can adapt and make stuff better for the environment, nature can never be wrong. So if you can try and do it as good you can, that must make a big difference. And out of experience on my farm, I'm busy with this for 15 years now. And the water infiltration, the soil erosion, water and wind, the erosion has almost disappeared.
But it's a process. It's not an event. And it takes longer than you think.
Yes. Yeah, so they've asked me before if it's expensive. So it's not that expensive in itself, but the process is expensive in that you make mistakes. Because it's new, it's difficult. It's not that difficult, but it's a challenge. So the mistakes I've made was the most expensive story in this whole. So, and I've taken this responsibility on myself as farmer. So I'm paying for my own mistakes, and I will do that because of my beliefs and what I'm trying to achieve. But it can mean that you won't make it. And then we can debate what is it to not make it. But we've seen exciting stuff, life coming back, species, small thing like earthworms. I always tell the story as children. Me and my brother were struggling to find earthworms on our farm. We knew a few spots where there was a tap dripping or somewhere in the garden. Now I can honestly say you can go to any spot on my farm, you'll find an earthworm. And just in that, it's fueling, but that's not money in the bank, but that's passion, and that's fueling what we're trying to achieve.
Derek, your view on regenerative farming versus pure, let's say, commercial old-style farming?
Conventional.
What's your view on that?
Well, the regenerative, any farmer that is not a custodian, that doesn't take care of his resources, I mean, simply won't be in the business for us. So every farmer has the responsibility to be the best custodian, to pay attention. And what I've just been listening to now, your ability to observe what's happening to your soil, what's happening on your farm, that's where you're going to find the answers. Each one's going to find the answers. So conventional tillage has brought us to where we are. We have a food system in the world which is predominantly built on the conventional tillage system. Is a no-till system, and we must understand very clearly, there's a big difference. If you say no-till, that's just a system. It's one small part, actually, of a regenerative agriculture approach. Let's call it an approach. Your approach, how you see you build sustainability and resilience in your business. And I've experienced it. I mean, I visited a number of farms while still totally on conventional tillage. And I spent some time in South Dakota on a farm, and the farmer had been on a no-till system for 20 years. So he says to me, "Do you no-till?" I literally got out of the truck on his farm. "I'm Rick Bieber, do you no-till?" I said, "No." And he says, "Why not?" And he spent the next 2 days explaining to me why he no-tills and why I should be no-tilling. I came back to South Africa, and I spent another 2 years trialing and finding answers to certain questions before I switched my operation 100% to no-till. So then 5 years down the line, I find myself running into a financial situation where it's just simply not sustainable. I just simply couldn't make it work anymore. So as much as what I might believe in the process, in the concept and everything, if I'm not going to make it, I'm not going to make it. So then you've got to say, well, all right, what do I want to do? I'm going to get out of this business because I believe that conventional tillage is evil, or am I going to do whatever it takes to sustain my business? So my farm at the moment is on a mix, where I need to till, and where I can get away with minimum tillage, but I see to it that there's cover. All the principles that are there that lean to it, you use the ones that are useful to you. But at the end of the day, you have to ensure sustainability. You've got to stay in business. We've got to keep feeding the world.
And therefore, the commercial farmer needs a sustainable business model to run on.
The problem is, and this is the question that I'm posing to the research fraternity right now, with regard to regenerative agriculture is the new buzzword. It used to be no-till for a number of years. Is, how long is it? They talk about the J-curve, how a business has a J-curve and it goes down, How deep is that J-curve?
And who's going to pay for that?
Yeah, if we understand that, if we understand how deep the J-curve is, then we can build systems, whether it's a subsidy system from government, if it's important or whatever. But if we understand, but until we understand that, we can't go out and tell every farmer, listen, stop your conventional tillage and just do regenerative tillage, and 50% of our farmers are out off the farm. We can't do that. So we've got to find, and that's the challenge to the research fraternity, is do the research. We've heard and we agree and we understand the principles of regeneration, of rebuilding the biodiversity, of bringing all the good things that nature gives us, bringing them back into your farming practice. But at the end of the day, it's got to be on a sustainable basis. You've got to be able to feed your family at the end of the day.
Jacques, your comment? Because the fact is, I think we all realize that climate is changing, but it's always been changing. We all realize we need to supply sustainable food, but we realize we need to look after our planet. Your view on this dichotomy, it seems, between efficient farming in terms of the maximum produce sustainable and the environment. How should one approach that?
So there was an interesting article that was released recently that was funded by the Western Cape Agricultural Department, where Stellenbosch was running this operation where they compared conventional agricultural practices versus regenerative agricultural practices in the Western Cape, the Mediterranean grain climate, or the Mediterranean climate for grain on that side. And they looked at the various practices. So they looked at minimum till and no till. They looked at bringing organic matter into the soil, so by mulching, cover cropping, keeping cover, rotational grazing, all those different systems. And they had a look. And funny enough, underneath each one of those paragraphs, there was a sentence that said, more research required. Okay. So it is not an easy transition. But from an ecological point of view, it is critical for us to conserve our biodiversity, and it's critical for us to conserve our ecosystem services. And by going on the way we are currently in the direction we're going, taking the climate out of it, just from a farming perspective, there has to be some incremental change to improve on the farming practices. I'm not a farmer myself, so it's really difficult for me to tell people how to do that. So I'm an extension officer, and what we try and do is look at the integrated approach on the farm and look at the biodiversity and see what we can do to improve that. But from a farming perspective, I just feel like using harmful agrochemicals, which are predominantly going to be phased out over time. If you look at what's happening in Europe, a lot of the agrochemicals we currently use in South Africa are not permissible in other countries. So with the transition towards to the EU Green Deal and other examples of that, there's going to be certain agrochemicals that are going to completely phase out in South Africa. And are the farmers then ready to adapt? And the only way that you're going to be able to adapt your farming system is by being able to have a resilient agricultural system. And the only way you're going to have a resilient agricultural system is by promoting healthy soils, promoting biodiversity around, and reducing the amount of agrochemicals. So there has to be a transition towards.
And there's also a consumer involved that is putting pressure on all of these things.
Yeah, no, for sure. Sorry if you want to.
Theo, if I may just, it worries me if commercial agriculture is painted as the bad guy. Because I don't think farmers are irresponsible to the level where we want to be harmful in the first place. You cannot sell a bad product to a consumer. So I mean, any farmer in his right mind understands that, the quality of the product that comes off the farm. You cannot indiscriminately use chemicals or resources that are granted, if they incorrectly used, that they are harmful. So, but commercial agriculture is not the bad guy in this thing. We're not out there. We're not gunning to destroy the planet or to do anything. That's not our business. That's not we in it. We're in this thing for the long haul. So together we'll find the solutions. But it worries me when the narrative goes to where commercial agriculture is the bad guy, and it's only the regen guys that are now the good guys.
Let's Janse, we can pick up on that discussion just now. From a government perspective, you noted that agriculture is not high on the agenda. Do you believe it should be higher on the agenda, or is there more research required?
I think it should be the number one agenda item when it comes to climate change. Absolutely. I think there's a lot we can do in South Africa, but as soon as the food runs out on our shelves, then we're in real trouble. Yeah. The social stabilizing factor that a viable, resilient agricultural sector, and that is commercial agriculture in South Africa. You can say what you like. This is
you need
really
the bulk load to come through.
Absolutely, and that's what you need. Just interestingly, while Derek, was mentioning that, the one thing people are forgetting is that agriculture has an extremely good news story to tell. Mm-hmm. The national government's greenhouse gas inventory report has just been released. Agriculture has steadily been declining its carbon footprint over the last 2 decades. Coupled with increasing pressure, on demands from consumers, from international markets, we know what the challenges are in agriculture altogether. It's an enormous compliment to the commercial agricultural sector that we've actually, and we're the only sector to do so, that has been able to reduce its greenhouse gas emissions, and that's through efficiency. So it's not through necessarily only responses to climate change, which I think is often misused a little bit. But in the context of government policy and thinking about that needs to be celebrated. and not interfered with too much, if I can put it that way. So, but more to your point, I think if anybody's going to tell you about climate change in South Africa, it's going to be a farmer. And bringing together those three elements of water security, energy security, and food security, I think, this is the sector where government should be knocking on doors to get answers.
That might be a tall order, but yeah.
I think part of it, the problem is also this definition of climate change, right? So are we talking about, are we mitigating, or who's the good guy, bad guy, et cetera, et cetera? I think the bigger topic of climate change and how it impacts us, that's obvious, right? So it's always been changing. The industry has always been experiencing it. The bigger question is sustainability is not just in the soil, it's also in the pocket. Yeah. And if you don't have money in the pocket, you can't drive that sustainability portion. So, internationally, a Europe or a USA or, these developed nations, they have a supportive structure when it comes to incentives on adaptation, etc. In South Africa, a little bit different, So I think framing this question and how we, as Derek said, who's the good guy, bad guy type thing, I think that the industry has the great benefit that we, from a South African agriculture perspective, can actually change the perspective. In other words, how the world views agriculture, produce in South Africa. To me, that's the bigger point. And that is absolutely coupled with who's the market. The market in South Africa, if we think about food security, we have millions of South Africans that can only afford, X rand from a disposable income perspective. Our economy is not growing. We have a lot of other issues where, mitigating on climate change is not the biggest one. If you take China, they've already said, again, the developed world, they had their chance. They're only going to move towards, a net zero status by 2040 or 2050. They just said it because in the end, they need to grow their economy, they need to feed their people. So I think the tough bit, like Janssen said, there's commitments, but parallel to that, the industry needs to survive. Yeah. And if surviving means that you're either going to have to till or you have to do something, you have to do it. Otherwise, you don't have affordable food. So food security is about having it, yes, but also is it affordable. So the bulk of our population moving to the metros, to the urban areas, they need very safe and very affordable food. So we need a food system to support that. Can we do it with call it a European model where you have little Saturday markets, etc.? We don't look like that. That's not our demographics. That's not our economy. And so also for a large part of Africa. So I think that's this one portion us as an industry need to decide on. The other one is also the positive contribution that agriculture has in the climate mitigation debate. And that's something that I think, again, there's limited research and also probably a lot of resistance in that research is carbon sequestration. So if you take a grass species and you what you see at the bottom, double at the bottom, what you see at the top, double in the soil, and how much carbon is going in just in that little, calculation that you can make. So, and that's where, again, things like changing consumption patterns, etc., all of that will have an impact, whether we like it or not. It all goes back to this market linkage. So, in our subsectors, yes, we're in grain South Africa territory with regards to grades, but I mean the biggest one of the biggest subsectors is livestock, right?
And I want to get to the livestock. And I'm going to start with you on the livestock again. The debate around livestock. Just give us a bit of perspective on that.
Yeah, I mean, so Derek, if I can say that the real bad guys when it comes to climate change or the stereotyping is on the livestock sector, right? So where cattle specifically, methane emissions, which again is the debate, you can have various angles in which you tackle that debate, but whatever gets emitted, how much of that actually goes back into the soil? So yes, there is, gas emissions or methane emissions, but again, if you don't have that circular or the ecosystem that was mentioned by Jacques, if you don't stimulate grass production, you don't have carbon being sequestrated into the soils, which means what's that negative externality? We all know that we're in a, the production system has changed. We're not like Europe where you can let land lay fallow and you get incentivized for that. So the beef or livestock industry, they're probably one of the industries that really, really need to dig in their heels and get the counterfactuals going with this argument. So I think the evidence, it's starting to build up, both sides of the coin. A country like Australia, as an example, by 2030, their target is net zero on all livestock production. In other words, on any label that goes out of Australia, meat-related, it's a net zero product. So I think the key thing is you have industries that need strategies with regards to how they tackle the mitigation portion.
In terms of Australia, what is the role of the government in that? Because I think where South Africa has got a challenge is we do not have this government incentives around farming. What is the Australian situation? Is government part of this?
I'm very glad you asked the question, and the answer is actually no. They facilitate, they enable, but the industry, Meat Livestock Australia, which is the biggest industry organization, they are actually driving it. They're driving all of the measures, the research, etc. Government is actually playing their role in enabling and actually being objective and saying that you as an industry need to come back to us and say X, Y, and Z, this is the direction that we need. So I think the positive from a BFAP perspective, there's great strides within all three, call it our big subsectors, within fruits and vegetables, grains and oilseeds, and livestock, in realizing that government is key in this whole process with regards to the enabling environment, but industry needs to pick up the baton and run. And that's what happened in a developed country like Australia.
Developed country like Australia. That's hard words. Yes, you wanted to say something.
Yeah, I'm sitting listening now. It's actually quite fascinating. So, again, disclaimer. In 2005, I built an ethanol plant on my farm to produce biofuels. Okay, so again, falls exactly in the narrative. So in this process, we were developing a stove. So the target market was household fuel. We used at that time, 69 million liters of paraffin for household, for cooking in South Africa, and we targeted this market. In that process, we developed a stove to use the ethanol fuel. Now, to get the stove ticked off SABS and all this other thing, we needed to have certain parameters measured, and that process took us to UCT and a certain Professor Lloyd. So we were spending the day there, and we having this stove tested, and I could see right from the get-go, he thought we're totally on the wrong end of the thing. We're wasting our time, and he was kind of just humoring us in the process. And we were discussing, and we were telling, this great story of clean energy, of what everything. So eventually he got to a point, he said, stop talking nonsense. So I said, well, what do you mean? He says, let's put this thing into perspective. During the Kuwait War, when they lit up all those oil fields, we burnt more oil, more carbon fuels in those 6 to 7 months than what cars in this country will burn for hundreds of years. And there was no change in the temperature. So get it in perspective. So how many cows need to pass gas?
Burp.
To get there. Fart is actually the word. to get to there. You understand? So again, researchers, tell me, put that in perspective. Let's get real about how much harm is coming from the farms, from the cows.
Donnie, we talked about regenerative agriculture and the economics around that. What is your experience?
Yeah, I think the problem is we want quick fixes in this world.
Nature's patient.
It's patient, and the problem is we want to change. We have to be economical, sustainable. Obviously, otherwise you'll go bankrupt. But hundreds of farmers are going bankrupt, conventional as well.
That's true.
But the problem is when you go bankrupt, trying to make a difference, it's always regenerative or no-till's fault. When you go bankrupt conventionally, it's nature's fault. So just think about that.
Again, it's science required.
And the problem is,
required.
I'm just an observationist, so I can't put science to this, but we have to be brutally honest with each other. Yeah. Brutally honest. And if you can see differences in your soil and your environment in one generation, we are not sustainable. We can say what we want. And we're farming for 40 years now. That's nothing. Yeah. So with all my respect, we've got a greater responsibility than this, and we can't just put this in a box in our generation or in our 10 years or 20 or 40 or 50 years. We've got a bigger responsibility than that because we want to farm forever. Yeah. And if we can have an influence on that, that's our responsibility, and it's worse when we know that. Just a small example for you. If you imagine a good friend of mine, the other day we went fishing. He told me, and you really have to think about this. Say, for the argument, 200 years back, all the rivers in South Africa were crystal clear.
With fish in.
Crystal clear with fish in that you can see to the bottom. Just take this into perspective. Have you seen how it looks now? And sorry to say that, I'm a farmer. Agriculture's got a very big part in that. I'm a regenerative farmer. You can come to my farm today. My reservoir, or my dam, or what do you call it, is clear, crystal clear. Because all the water that go to that dam is from my farm. My neighbor's dam looks like a chocolate milkshake. And that doesn't take science to... Science can't even measure that. Yeah. I don't know why. I can see it. I can't measure it. So we must be brutally honest. We can talk here, and that's why I think government must be much more involved. Helping guys. I don't want anything because there's no free gifts in life. You have to work for what you have. But the arts here is we don't get any support. You have to take all this responsibility for everybody on your own. And then when you go down, you fall down, they kick you. You know,
this
sad.
discussion,
it's very sad.
Yeah. It seems like one of those views that for every complex problem, there's a simple solution that doesn't work. It seems that that's where we are. Jacques, let's talk about success stories. Where are you getting, talk a bit about sharing your success. Which areas have you been successful? Where have you seen the successes? Because I think it's important to note, as Don is saying, there is a balance here that we need to scientifically, but also purely from experience can see. Where's the successes that you are? Just elaborate on that a bit.
So one of the projects that we're currently working on is called the Conservation Champions Program, which is predominantly, as I mentioned earlier, focused on the wine and fruit industry in the Cape Winelands. And we currently support 60 farms scattered throughout the Cape Winelands, and they all focus on protecting, managing, and restoring. So the protecting, collectively, they conserve over 25,000 hectares of fynbos, which is
around the farms.
Around the farms, yeah. So, which is the Cape Floristic region is a biodiversity hotspot, one of the global biodiversity hotspots, and obviously there's a lot of biodiversity in that area, and it's become degraded over time, and we've got increasingly amounts of fragmented habitats scattered throughout the Cape Winelands. You can imagine 20 years ago. You've got the mountain that's full of fynbos, and then you've got a little bit of step down, and then the rest of all the valuable agricultural soils has basically been developed. So there's been a transition with the farms, looking at the soil specifically, where they look at, are these soils really viable to farm on? And the areas that they found that are not as suitable for whatever they're growing, there's a shift towards creating natural habitats, so restoring nature, bringing back biodiversity. There's a number of species that have gone extinct that have now been rediscovered through this process, Another species that are basically range restricted. So there's this, I'm going to ramble about a specific species now, but there's this Babiana species that only occurs at a specific, on the edge of a specific granite rock. And it's such a unique habitat that it requires. And the pollinator is the specific moth that goes sits in it at night to pollinate this Babiana species. So historically, that farm used to, I'm not going to harp on conventional agriculture too much, but from an ecological point of view.
But remember, this is why we have these discussions.
Yeah.
It's not, if everybody agreed on everything, we wouldn't sit here.
Yes.
So we need these discussions and we need the viewpoints.
Yes.
So I appreciate the fact that there's different viewpoints and research is required. But that's why we have these discussions.
So the specific Babiana, as I mentioned, is good. The pollinator, so if you were using intensive pesticides like that farm used to use in the past, and that's why that species is critically endangered, that pollinator will not be there. That means that the knock-on effect on the plant that would occur, the Babiana, is also going to disappear. So we're losing species through certain practices that have been implemented over a long period. So this farm, just because of that one species, is called one of their wines, the Babiana, and they've removed pesticides from the agricultural system because they see the value in having biodiversity there. Other examples are farms that have shifted to more of a regenerative approach to how they farm, and it's not an overnight thing.
It's not nature takes time.
Yes, so none of the farms that I've ever worked with have said they've done this. They've gone from conventional to regenerative overnight. I think it's something that grows inside a person that works outside and works with the farm. So they can see, okay, well, let's experiment with different cover crops. Let's see what impact that has on the soil. And let's see, do we improve the soil carbon? Does life improve in the soil? And I've seen farmers introducing certain things like mulching on the bunkies, and bringing microorganisms into the soil, composting, all those type of factors. And then over time, you can see, okay, well, I'm seeing a bit of a difference here. It's anecdotal, there's no research behind it, but I mean, the guys that have been farming for many years, I think they can see when there's an improvement in the soil quality. So there's many of those examples, and now there's also examples of farms becoming a little bit more technical with the way that they farm. So they are introducing organic matter into the soil through mulching and composting and bringing in various cover crops. But at the same time, they're using technology to monitor the effectiveness.
As part of the process.
Yes. So, I mean, there's lots of satellite imagery, there's drone technology, soil sampling, the way that you irrigate, or using different irrigation systems. The way you pump your water from your dam to your pastures, or the way you pump your water to your orchards. Those are all small little things that play a big role in the larger, bigger scheme of things. And this one specific farm, through this technology, have sampled areas, and they say, okay, well, this specific patch within this 10-hectare block of orchards requires X amount of fertilizer. And now, instead of back in the day of saying, okay, well, we're going to do X amount of fertilizer per hectare because that's the conventional,
you do it per
you do it per specific area. So I think there's a lot to learn, and I think maybe the key here is that there needs to be a message across. And so I think that's what WWF would like to play as well, the role that we try and play, is that we try and tell the story to consumers. And that's a big part of what WWF does.
Look, guys, I actually thought there was something wrong with my phone because our hour is almost gone. Before I end up with closing comments, this has gone extremely fast, but is there any questions, anybody with very specific questions that they want to put at some of the panelists? Yes, there's a question at the back. Yeah, if you can, there's a roving mic that they'll send up.
Hello. Sorry. Yeah, so I'm not a farmer or a scientist, but the way I see it, just from your conversation, firstly, thank you guys. It seems like you all have good interests at heart, and I think you might disagree about a few things, but at the end of the day, your heart's in the right place. The way I see it, and it might be a naive point of view, is you have the farmers who, you have your economic interests and other interests at heart, and then you have the regulatory side of things, which have specific interests from government's point of view, targets that they want to meet. Now, the one thing I've always thought is that technological innovation is probably the one thing that can tick both those boxes. It doesn't have to be a this person versus that person, this interest versus that interest. It's actually something that can tick both boxes. And I just wanted your opinion on that. What is the current stance on technological innovation, maybe not just in South Africa, but overseas? Is that something that's being prioritized? Because I feel like a lot of the time when you look from a political point of view, it's almost, the argument sounds like restriction more so than, innovating. I just wanted your opinion on that. Do you think that alignment of interests would be very beneficial for all parties involved?
Thank you very much. Is there another question? I'm going to take the questions, Francois.
Thank you, Theo. Just from a practical point of view, I think some farmers might not realize that they have a positive asset on their balance sheet. So from a practical point of view, where are we with carbon credits? Because that normally, takes a lot of the arguments away. If there's an financial incentive and farmers start measuring, this is an item on my balance sheet, I've already paid for it, and I'm not generating income from it. So if you are in a positive balance, I'd like to know it, because then I can start trading it. So where are we practically? That is the one thing that I think we're not looking at enough. So we're arguing about a lot of things, but let's just start with the very basics. On my farm, where am I? And isn't it possible that I am positive and I can start trading something?
Does anybody have specific knowledge of where we are in the carbon credit trading environment in South Africa?
Can I share frustration about that? Yeah. The same story about the ethanol plant and the biofuels and going through that process. I had many discussions at various levels right into the EU Parliament in Brussels with regard to carbon credits and trading and getting it off the ground. My project, of course, was just so small that it just becomes negligible. So all the talk that happens is talk. Francois, it's incredibly frustrating that we can't get a system in place where these things become tradable. It's almost, I can draw the analogy to when our markets were deregulated and we started SAFEX. It was a huge issue to get the participants to start using the market. But get a system, put the platform up there and start trading carbon credits, even if it's small. But until we start doing it, it's never going to happen. If it's only within the ambit of the big multinationals and the Escoms of this world that can gain any benefit out of carbon credits, then it's never going to happen for a farmer. Put a system in place where we can start trading this, where we can start exploiting those values.
Gerard?
Yeah, I think what's key about that, so there's about 2 or 3 companies currently in South Africa linking it to, call it the carbon exchange. So the carbon tax not yet being fully implemented, etc. The big issue is the measurement of carbon. Are you measuring it in the first 20, and these mechanisms, they differ across the globe. And that's also part of this science, coupled with industry and private sector. I agree 100% with what Francois mentioned. That is the actual measurement, is carbon in the soil, because carbon in the soil, twofold. One, you can trade it, but you can also have some measurement of risk, because water infiltration, soil microbes, etc. So all of a sudden, the financing institute, the bank, the co-ops, etc., they can actually start to quantify risk mitigation.
But we're not there yet.
Yeah.
Unfortunately. Yeah. Technology, the question about technology, I do think that the one thing that as a point of departure, because South African farmers does not enjoy the support of government on the one hand, and on the other hand, they compete against international markets. They compete for space in Tesco against grape farmers of the whole world. So they need to adapt every single bit of technology to remain sustainable. So that question is ticked. The question is on the other side of the coin in terms of the blending. You want to say something?
Yeah, dear, with regard to technology, would it be possible, would we be where we are today in the regenerative progress that we're making if it wasn't for innovative science, for innovation, for the technologies that came in weed control systems, in fertilization systems and things like that? So technology is absolutely key. It's again, is the chemical industry the villain completely, or is it contributing? So we need to be careful. But without technology, if you had to leave a farmer and say to him, okay, no pesticides, no nothing, all you have is nature, how long would that road be, as opposed to the tools that you do have now? So technology is absolutely key.
Yeah. Depending on where you are, what your soil status, but if your soil is very healthy, you'll go far.
Yeah.
But we're not there.
Yeah.
But because of ourselves. So it's the whole debate. But technology is very important. We have to use it if it's there.
All right, before I'm going to take a last round of questions, but I want you all to think about what is the message. And let's put the background. Climate change is here. It's been here forever. We need to supply the sources of food for the consumer, but we also need to look after our planet to remain sustainable. So there's a balance here. And I want to ask the one question of all of you. Your key message or advice or point of view that the viewer and the people attending this discussion need to take away from your point of view. So it's more of an advice message perspective. While I'll take the last question, is there any other questions? Yes, sir, there's two on this side.
Hi, yeah, it's John Hudson from Nedbank, and I guess financial sustainability is, very important to the bankers. I'm fully appreciative of the fact that more research needs to be done to support it.
Apologies, John.
So the question I'm asking, more of a comment, is the WWF and Nedbank, and it's part of the research that is required. We did jointly financed a study in the dairy industry in the Eastern Cape, and it was done by Trace and Save, who are doing a lot of good work in the sustainability space. And of their 40-odd farmers or so, they feel that they've already got 7 farmers that are net zero, dairy farmers. These are commercial dairy farmers. So I think it's that type of research and that type of almost leadership from the farmers that are showing what can be done. And there's so much to do, but I think we're making tremendous progress. The last comment from me, I think as South African farmers, we have nothing to hold back at all. We stand up with the best in the world, and I think from a climate smart point of view, we are doing as much, if not more, than some of our counterparts around the world. So, I think we're making progress. Yes, there's still a lot to do, but this is a journey that we're on, and I'm seeing the take-up in sustainability from a finance point of view is just going through the roof. So just a few comments from me. Thanks.
Thanks, John. There was a question there at near the back.
Thanks, Jack Armour, Freeset Agri. Janse and Gerard touched on the just energy transition from fossil fuels to natural non-renewables to renewables, and I think we need that in the agricultural sector as well, this just transition. And there's a lot of potential in growing energy crops and once again that balance between food security versus energy security. But maybe that energy crop could be the link, the cover crop that funds your transition, an extra crop that you can bring in that you can also get an income from. Just any comments on that? Thanks.
Thank you very much. Any comments on that? Yes, Gerard.
So thank you, Jack, for the question and the comment. So we've been doing work in the biogas industry, and some of the colleagues sitting here actually. That's probably one of the greatest opportunities in agriculture. I mentioned way in the beginning, all of this is linked to market. So, and we're in a deregulated free market. So if maize can enter the country with certain tariffs, etc., and it's cheaper, it will come in. And if our producers can do it cost effective, it will go out. And that's the balance, right? So it's always supply and demand. And the same with land. So I mean, we have about 16.5 million hectares of arable land, and we're only using a portion of that in cash crops. A lot of that was moved back into pastures. Mm. And all of it ties to climate, but it also ties to the market. And when the market was there, surplus removal, etc., that just tells you can still produce at a given price, always. So the opportunity that another market presents South Africa, that's a great opportunity. And coupling that with all the big commitments that we made, agriculture can play a huge role in actually contributing to those commitments in just transition. Which other industry is going to do it? Which other industry will sequester carbon and actually take it down that balance, the balance sheet? So I think that's probably one of the greatest opportunities, but it will always be coupled within the policy framework. And maybe, Theo, I'll end with my last comment.
Yes, that's all right. While you have the floor.
Yeah, so my last comment would be maybe to clarify, government does have a role to play, absolutely. Industry shouldn't wait, but the role that government can play from creating this buffer, because that's the big problem. It's a timing thing, and I think that's what Dani also mentioned. So creating the buffer as as an enabler, in other words, to support in these dips, because you will always get them. So that buffer is something that it's not there anymore, and the relationship and all of that, I think industry has done great work over the past 5 to 10 years in rebuilding relationship, but that's a great opportunity. So in other words, get the support from government to support with a buffer that us as an industry in agriculture actually needs to go into the just transition program. And then on the industry side, as I mentioned, the baton is actually in our hands with regards to how we promote exactly what the gentleman from Nedbank mentioned. There's fantastic stories to tell, and we're big time into the export market. So what image does South Africa have with regards to already climate mitigation and adoption strategies and carbon sequestration? I think that's something that the wine industry and the fruit industry, they're moving on that. But again, a couple of our other industries really needs to work hard, and we need to do it now.
They can learn from those industries. They can catch up.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Your final comments, Derek?
Let's guard against activism, guard against driving a narrative where commercial agriculture is just bad. When you start really speaking to farmers, and farmers that are progressive, that are understanding, are farmers that are looking after their soils, that are doing the right, whose focus is sustainability. They're the farmers that are going to stay in business. So I think we need a lot more answers. For me, key would be if we could put a guide on the table that guides a farmer through this process, that'll ensure he's sustainable, that'll ensure that he's in business 5 years down the road. If it takes 5 years, or if it takes 10 years, like you say, it depends where your soils come from. It depends at what level, what level of degradation you start the turnaround. So, but the quicker that we can gain that understanding, but speak to the farmers. Ask the farmers where they're at. They're the guys that are dealing with it every day.
And their livelihood depends on it.
It absolutely depends on it. So I think a lot of discussion, a lot of research is needed, a lot of science needs to go into this. what really worries me in this debate is the level of activism that comes, that develops out of this. Look what happened in Holland just recently, where they wanted to shut down most of their farms. It's just, it's very, very difficult, and it concerns me when the great concept of regenerate or of working with nature gets misinterpreted.
But let me then take on a point that Gerard is saying. Is part of that not the fact that the farmers need to communicate their role better to the consumer and the government?
Absolutely. Absolutely. We've got to keep this debate alive. But farmers I won't call them strange. Farmers, when you start accusing a farmer, he's just going to step out of the ring, and he's not going to.
But there is a responsibility.
Absolutely, absolutely. There's no doubt about it.
Janse, from your point of view, what is your advice conclusion in terms of this discussion?
I think that was one of the reasons why Agri-SA insisted on having an agricultural representative at the highest government structure in the Presidential Climate Commission, is to provide an evidence-based, balanced view on agriculture's role, how climate change affects it, and how it affects changing climate. To me, the biggest thing is in government's thinking, and I know we have a lot of challenges in South Africa, is that government's thinking needs to be informed by rational, balanced arguments on behalf of agriculture at the center of the debate. What worries me very much in the climate change debate is also, the doom and gloom predictions that a person has, and you read the models, about drying western part of the country and winter, more disasters and so forth. And if you draw a logical conclusion from it, it seems as if, agriculture doesn't seem viable, and that's wrong. We can't have that in South Africa. Agriculture needs to remain viable as a key economic...
the climate changes.
Well, it has a contribution to make, one, and it needs to feed a population. There's no two ways about it. There's not much room in that. So when government makes decisions about it, put the food security of South Africa at the center of the debates and the arguments. I think that's my parting shot for today.
Put food security at the center of the debate.
Absolutely.
Dani?
Yeah, thank you, Theo. The problem we have, and the advice I will have, or my final comments, is we have to have trial and error to get to a point where we can say, this is how you go through this transition, this is where you are. And we need that for farmers to do that, to do these practices. That's the problem. So that trial and error is on us, and not as farmers individually. And that's a bit of a problem, but that sounds negative. I'm 15 years into this. There is huge success stories to farm without all this bad chemicals and fertilizers, and not to step on any toes. My biggest yield, and not to brag about it, just in context, my biggest yield ever on my farm was on this year. It's just been done now on 33 hectares, so it wasn't just a small plot. Biggest yield on soyas ever was without any fertilizer for the past 5 years, without any pesticides, without any herbicides, only herbicides with planting the soyas. And I don't know how I've done it. I don't know how it wasn't me. It's nature. But there's no science behind that. If I ask anybody how does this happen, they just say it's your soil health. But there's not a handbook, there's not a, so it's really, really difficult. But it's possible. And the story that with regenerative, we can't feed the world. We can feed the world doubly over with regenerative. If we can do we haven't even scratched the surface of what we are doing, but we can go ultra-density grazing, we can go natural feedlots, we can go, the sky's the limit. So it's really, really possible. But on the way, some people will fall off and some people will get on. And that's been farming all through history. on conventional, on regenerative, on whatever basis. But we have to change. That is inevitable. We can't just sit here because we can already see what's happening. And if we keep a blind eye to that, we won't be able to farm like we are used to farm now conventionally forever.
But even
a fact.
your experiences, we can feed the world if we change.
Definitely. We can feed the world with half what we have now.
Right, I'm going to give...
We can give a lot of land to conservation only to be natural.
Let me, guys, I think our time, I'm going to give the last word to Jacques. I think it's only fair, Jacques, that, that you have the last word in this discussion.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I look at it like this. Pastures, in a pasture system, you've got a carry capacity. You can only put so many cattle on that specific pastures and keep them on there for that 1 hectare for that long. Nature only has a certain amount of finite of natural resources that we all need to use. And we need clean water, healthy soils, pollinators. And so all I can say is from a farm level, I think there is evidence to show that if you change your approach to be more nature-centered and soil-centered and your farming practices, there is success. Yes, there is more research required, but there is success stories out there. There's evidence right here. Then from a landscape level, we really require a more holistic approach with our natural habitats. The intact natural habitats need to stay intact, and we need to manage them effectively. And then from a sustainable food systems perspective, the supply chain and support from government is critical. I think research is required on all these different topics. There's amazing stories, there's amazing examples. We need to use those farms and examples as illustration of what can be done.
Thank you very much. I think, guys, let's give this panel a nice hand. I think it was a wonderful discussion. I think it's certainly a topic that requires more research. But it's also a topic that's in the interest of all of us, because we need quality, sustainable, affordable food, but we've only got this one planet that we have to live on. So thank you, guys. Thank you for participating. I think it was a great discussion. Thank you very much.